Hello everybody and welcome back. And today I've got a replay for all of you from the Sneaky Snake who's playing an Udaloi. Now before we get into the actual battle, because they're actually heading towards a cap to get all set up, first of all, hope you all having a great week so far. It's okay where I am, just gray and gloomy. Kind of typical Canadian weather, right? If you ever meet Canadians, you'll find that out really quickly, that they really like to talk about the weather, just because the weather is usually quite a topic. It could be one weather state one day and another weather state the next day, and it can change sometimes even by the hour or so. Yeah. Anyway, so today's video is really two things. One, it's a pretty cool replay. I mean, in terms of the amount of damage done and everything, it's a pretty nice replay. But the other thing I guess I want to talk about is the fact that this replay sort of shows you the value of damage and why sometimes that's a very misleading figure. Like, you look on like the forums or Reddit or whatnot, and you'll see people using how much damage, right? How much damage somebody does as a metric. And unfortunately, that metric is, well, not very accurate, and I'll sort of show you guys why in this particular video. So, Sneaky Snake, first of all, and his Gearing division mate head to A. Not a bad decision, especially considering what's on the enemy team. If you look at the enemy team's two destroyers, there's a Gearing, and there is also a Benson, which an Udaloi and a Gearing can take on pretty comfortably. So, they made a push onto A. Not a bad decision. The one thing, of course, you have to be somewhat wary of is the fact that the enemy team does have their fair share of radar cruisers, although those cruisers kind of came out and, as you can tell, are isolated because they were out in the open while their own team's battleships were in cover. And, of course, that led the, Sneaky Snake's team, their battleships, to really open up on their cruisers because there was just no worries about their battleships shooting back. So that's the thing as a cruiser, right? Like, you got to keep that in mind as well. You have to be very careful about the positioning of yourself versus your team. If your team is out there able to draw a certain amount of threat away from you, then you can kind of come out. If you're by yourself, coming out means you get focused, and that's not exactly all that much fun. Alright, so the Gearings nailed down the cap, which is fine. Udaloi, by the way, as a Russian gunboat, you generally don't go into a cap with another destroyer. So let's say you have a US destroyer that's going for the cap. You don't go in with them. You're there really to provide sort of fire support. Alright, so here's where a large portion of this battle is going to unfold. The enemy team, their cruisers have abandoned them. As you can tell, their cruisers went the other way. So all the battleships are here. Now, if you were the battleship in this particular case, this is probably a good time to start deciding to go, yeah, this is maybe not the best place to be. Either that, or you just push and YOLO and hope for the best, right? So either you start backing away or you keep pushing. Well, the battleships on the enemy team sort of do neither. They're caught up in a bit of indecision. They come around, they have no cruiser support, no destroyer support. They don't push out, and they don't really run away either. They just kind of stop. And by stopping, this is not a good place to stop, just because you're out in the open. And yeah, as you can tell, Sneaky Snake immediately starts going off with torpedoes and goes with guns. Of course, you notice that what he did was he actually set one fire onto the Iowa and then turned around and set a fire onto the Kerr first. And what this does is battleships don't usually put out single fires, right? So what you can do if you're dealing with, let's say, 2 or 3 battleships, is you can set one on fire and then switch targets and either wait for the first battleship to put out the fire or have them burn for the full duration, which is a chunk of HP that, they're going to have to get back through heals. But usually, yeah, you'll see the Iowa just keeps burning with that one fire. So you can do that. You can sort of divide your fires, and in a way, you can pick up quite a lot of damage. As you can tell, already about 40,000 damage done. Now the Iowa's still burning. And there we go. Kerfus is going to eat a torpedo. There you go. There's the torpedo. There's the flooding. And of course, that Kerfus had earlier taken fire and I believe had repaired it. So now is going to flood and burn for quite a while longer. Damage amounts, as you can tell, is starting to spike dramatically into the 80,000 range already. Like, look at that damage take off, right? But here's where the other important part of the conversation has to happen, which is the value of the damage. And that's a really important topic to talk about, because if you take a look right now, Sneaky's already gotten up to 95, and still climbing, 95, almost 100,000 damage, off of essentially, not, well, 2 battleships, but one of them is still alive, and the other one was mostly taken out by that fire flooding, and even a lot more of that damage was actually attributed to friendly torpedoes. So, yes, a lot of damage has already been done, but is that valuable damage? Because what people tend to compare is, like, they'll look at one destroyer and they go, oh, but this destroyer only averages like 50,000 damage. The Russian destroyers, which average, let's say, 20,000 more on average, are markedly superior destroyers. That's usually kind of the arguments you see, but then you look at it and you go, yes, but where is that damage coming from? Is one destroyer primarily engaging other destroyers and getting damage that way? Because remember, destroyers have a lot lower HP pool, right? You kill a tier 10 destroyer and get 22,000 damage, versus if you kill, let's say, a Kurfürst, that's 100,000 plus on just that one ship alone. But the game's way of perceiving it is you've essentially contributed the same amount in terms of contribution, because you've both taken out a ship from 100% HP to 0. And that's how it calculates experience as well. And also from a gameplay perspective, you know, doing 20,000 to, let's say, a destroyer and taking it out of the battle, and then doing, let's say, 80, 90,000 to a battleship and the battleship stays alive, consider what's more valuable there, right? The destroyer has a lot of value as well. And I'm not saying, by the way, I'm not saying that killing battleships is not valuable. I'm just saying that the damage values are different. Right? Doing 22,000 and killing a destroyer is a significantly more valuable amount of damage than, let's say, doing 70, 80,000 to a battleship, and the battleship is still ticking, right? So as of the moment, as you can tell, 160,000 damage and climbing, with a badge already as well for Sneaky Snake. But again, look, I mean, yes, they've done a fantastic job, by the way. Absolutely fantastic job holding these battleships back. And I have to say, the enemy team probably made a bit of a misplay here too, because when they still had their Kurfürst, their Yamato all over here, I would say it would have been better for them to actually have pushed instead of just held back and stopped. By stopping like the way they did, I really think they've essentially screwed themselves, because they couldn't seem to retreat, and they basically got caught stuck in this one position and got burned and torpedoed to death. So the enemy team, I feel like, also sort of misplayed here. And Sneaky Snake does a wonderful job of having smoked up his own team, right? Smoked up that little area, continued to harass with guns and torpedoes, fires and everything. And the enemy team basically got caught in that no-win scenario. But also, again, don't forget that their cruisers left them and they had no destroyers. So you can sort of see what the issues for a bunch of battleships are in that kind of scenario. It's like you have only one or two choices, right? Either push out for hopefully the best possible thing you can get by pushing, or you start falling back immediately. And the Iowa could have, I think, probably backed up, actually started reversing instead of staying there. Reversing behind an island. I think Kurfürst with its turtleback armor could have probably turned away and try to escape that way. I mean, at close range with turtleback, you're not going to get citadeled. So I think that would have been a better idea. But unfortunately, enemy team didn't really do any of those. They kind of just, I think they were a little bit indecisive. Maybe they were just a little bit scared by what they were facing. They felt like maybe the push would have been unsuccessful. But sometimes even then, right? It's like, I'd rather push and go down in a way, a hail of glory, than to basically get caught in a situation like this where you run away and do very little. You have very little impact on the battle. It's better to just go in there, do as much as you can, and die, than do very little and end up getting chased to death by the enemy team. That's not much fun. So Yamato takes a pot shot at Sneaky, actually lands a decent salvo for a Yamato. Sneaky, well, pops smoke, and of course the Yamato not really going to be getting another shot in here. Alright, so enemy CV pops into visual range, within gun range, and of course Sneaky shoots, gets a fire, and then turns attention back to Yamato. See, this is a way to actually farm up damage as well. Put one fire, enemy ship might not want to put it out right away, you know, for fear that they might take another one. So you just let that fire burn, and that's a lot of damage. But okay, there is the high caliber. But now you think about it, right? Sneaky's sitting on 220,000 plus damage already. But think about the value of that 220,000 damage. Most of it was done against pretty tanky high-tier battleships that have quite a bit of HP, right? He doesn't fully outright kill one of those battleships by himself. He does get a whole bunch of damage there, right? I mean, already got, like I mentioned earlier, Wither and everything through flooding and fires. But he hasn't outright killed anything. Had he done even, let's say, 30 or let's say 40,000 damage to 2 destroyers, that would have been 2 full destroyer kills. And the game treats that, you know, as a percentage, right? It treats HP in terms of percentage. If you do 100% to a destroyer, you're going to be, you know, on par, experience-wise, with doing 100% to a battleship. But then you think about the difference in damage there, right? You can get a tier 10 destroyer, and you'd only be getting, what, 22,000 HP maybe out of that destroyer on average? Versus if you kill a tier 10 battleship, that's significantly more damage there. So why am I talking about this? It's because when you look at statistics and you look at the stats of a ship and you argue whether they're performing, underperforming, overperforming, whether one line is stronger than another, you really have to think about what are the ideal targets for this particular ship. If I'm doing, let's say, 50,000 average damage in a Gearing versus if I'm doing 70,000 average damage in a Udaloi, does that necessarily mean that the Udaloi is a better ship? Not necessarily, because you have to think about what kind of targets the Udaloi primarily will be focused on. Be the high HP battleships that they're harassing, they're probably going to maybe get more damage there. Versus a Gearing, where you might be involved in more gunfights against, let's say, other destroyers. You might have killed a Shima for, let's say, 20,000 HP. But that's a more valuable 20,000 HP. Because you're taking a tier 10 high threat destroyer out of the game. Versus if you, like I said, did like 60,000 to a Yamato, while the Yamato is still alive. And so while this game ended up at like 267,000 damage, I believe, was the final total, and that is the highest Udaloi damage game on the North American server, you might notice that the rewards might seem a little bit underwhelming. Just a touch, right? I mean, you're so much damage, right? And the credit gain is okay at 565,000. That's a good amount of credits earned. But the experience of 5,588 just seems a little bit lackluster, right? I mean, take a look. I mean, it's a huge amount of damage. 491 hits. There's 14 fires, 2 torpedo hits, tons of damage. You know, getting high caliber, getting Witherer, all that. But the experience amount just doesn't seem like it's going to blow you away, right? Especially because this is also on a premium account. If you take a look at the base experience, you notice the base experience is only 2,261. It's not a very high amount for, you know, what that amount of damage you would think would net in terms of experience. And that really goes to show you that the value of the damage is quite important. So if you're a destroyer player, and you're going out and you're killing 2 destroyers a game, and you're doing, let's say, 40, 50,000 damage, you're doing fine. You're doing the job that you need to do, right? So don't always just look at your damage amount and feel, oh, like I'm not doing enough. You're doing okay as long as the damage has good value, right? Anyways, in terms of if you actually look at the damage there, 131,000 from fires and flooding. Good God. Still a bit of a fire starter there. And finally, in terms of credits, net earnings of 398,374, which is pretty damn good for a tier 9 destroyer. Anyways, folks, I hope you enjoyed the actual replay. I mean, he did do a really, really good job with his Udaloi, but hopefully this also shows you that there is sort of a value to the damage that you're doing, and maybe that'll give you a slightly different perspective on the amount of damage that you're doing with the ships that you have. Anyways, folks, take care, have a good one. Hopefully the weather doesn't suck where you are, and I'll talk to all of you again soon.